Okay, let's go through War Photographer so that you can develop some knowledge and understanding of it for your exams. I'll give you a quick overview of it first. The the poem's really set in the UK, and it follows an individual, the war photographer, who is at the start of the poem developing photos that he's taken of a conflict, some kind of war overseas. Um, and as you work through the poem, it starts by, well, Duffy starts by contrasting the quiet process of developing the photos with the horrors that the photographer has witnessed. Um, we It's made apparent that the photos, the images, are going to appear in a Sunday supplement, the sort of the glossy magazines that you get inside Sunday newspapers. However, um, the photographs themselves, although they may evoke some emotional response in the readers of these magazines, this emotional reaction is short-lived and not deeply felt. And in fact, the people who consume the photos are relatively indifferent to them, and they're quite quick to move on with their comfortable lives in the UK. Meaning that the war photographer's work is essentially a futile process, and he's not really having any impact on anyone or anything. So the poem really is an expression or an exploration of the photographer's struggle to come to terms with the trauma that he's witnessed and the horror of conflict around the world, but also the fact that his work has very little impact. Okay, let's start working through the poem. Oh no, we'll read the poem and then we'll look at my annotations. So, war photographer. In his dark room, he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again, to ordinary pain which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands. Something is happening. The stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. A half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick, with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. So, let's start working through this. Interestingly, the poem opens on in an image or a situation in which the photographer is isolated. He's finally alone. He's in his dark room. Now that is really similar to the ending of the poem, when again the war photographer is in this isolated position. He's in an aeroplane, sort of staring down at a place where he earns his living, and the people there don't care. So it starts and ends on this image of the war photographer being isolated. And I think it's important you understand why he is. Obviously, he doesn't really belong to the world of conflict. He's not part of the conflict. He's there documenting it. And then when he comes back to his homeland, the experiences he's undergone and the things he's witnessed prevent him from sort of fully being a part of that community anymore. And so, in a way, his role, his job, his occupation has served to alienate him from people. And you get that sense at the start of the poem and at the end of the poem. He's obviously pleased to be alone. There's a sense of relief that you can see there. And he uses the word finally alone. It's almost as if this dark room is a sanctuary for him. It's away from the suffering that he has to witness. The second line, this image of spools of suffering, referring to the films that he has, of the films of images that he has, is a really powerful emotive one. I think the plural on spool, making it spools, indicates the extent of the horror that he's seen. That again is picked up as a detail later in the poem when it talks about the 100 agonies in black and white. So again, he's not just capturing a few images of agony and suffering. There's hundreds of them. So again, really powerful emotive stuff. So that idea of the extent of the pain that he witnesses, you can see at the start and again at the end. In this first stanza, Duffy compares the photographer to a priest. You can see it there on line 5. And I think you need to sort of consider the role of priests in a society and therefore how the war photographer perceives himself maybe. Priests obviously play a really important functional part of a society. They're part of the community. People go to them for advice, to be taught, to be guided. They're exposed to grief and people suffering. And so perhaps a war photographer sees himself in a similar kind of role. I think the simile that compares him, or the comparison to a priest in preparing to intone a mass, also lends a certain significance to what he's doing. It's made to seem important. The final line of the stanza is really hard hitting, really quite poignant. 3 simple sentences, or 4 simple sentences. The first 3 just listing places, locations around the world that are synonymous with conflict. It's blunt, it's brutal, it's sort of really forcing home the message that suffering is a function happening on a global scale. And then this final sentence, all flesh is grass, it's a biblical reference that establishes the foregrounds the idea that life is fragile, that we all will inevitably die, and that we will return to the earth. So quite poignant, somber beginning, which is also established through some of the sounds and the phonological features of this first stanza. You'll see sibilants and quite a few hushed tones that help to create this somber, reflective mood, which is absolutely appropriate to a poem that focuses on suffering, conflict, and death and injustice. Starts the second stanza with this sort of definitive statement, this declarative statement that he has a job to do. So it's obvious that the photographer has this sense of duty. It also suggests an emotional detachment, which is picked up in the line beneath it when we're told that his hands didn't tremble when he was taking the photos. So obviously he feels his sense of duty, and he's a very professional photographer who's not caught up in the emotion at the moment. That again is referenced, I think, somewhere else. Yeah, towards the end of the third stanza, when it says he had to do what someone must. Again, this sense of duty. He sees his job as a vocation. Interestingly, though, now that he's developing the photos, you'll notice that his hands do tremble now. So obviously, the events that he's witnessed have had an emotional impact on him. And there's this idea that perhaps he's brought this home with him. He's haunted by it. And again, this idea of him bringing these experiences home, like being traumatized by what he's seen, is picked up in stanza 3, when, as he's looking at a photo and it's beginning to develop, and an individual is starting to twist before his eyes on this photograph. The person on the photo is described as a half-formed ghost. And it's obvious that the photographer can vividly remember the incident. So again, it's really impacted on him. He's a damaged individual, the war photographer. Despite being professional and emotionally detached at the time, the trauma and the things that he's seen do come home with him. He does bear the scars. Rural England's referenced here in second stanza on line 9. And again, it's a really short little simple sentence which invites a comparison to the way in which the places are listed in line 6. Obviously, it's drawn a contrast between rural England, which is synonymous with tranquility and serenity and peace, and these places of conflict. So it's starting to sort of show the inequality or the injustice, the lottery of existence, really, like depending where you are. Some people have it easy, some don't. So that invites you to make that connection. As does the end of that second stanza, where it compares the fields in England to the fields in conflict zones. So the fields in England don't explode beneath your feet. Children aren't having to run away from napalm exploding behind them. So again, you get this sense of contrast and difference between places and worlds. Stanza 3 opens with something quite dramatic. Something is happening. And then stanza 3 really focuses on the events that he witnesses. And it's clear that it has a really powerful impact on him. It's quite an emotive paragraph describing the death of a man as his wife watches. So an emotive impact. Then moving down into the final stanza, you'll see the futility of his job and the way that his photographs are consumed. First of all, we're told the editor will pick out 5 or 6. So only 5 or 6 of these 100 agonies are picked. So it's a sense of like, I'll just have 5 or 6. There's a carelessness attached to it. Most of them significantly are ignored. And even the ones that are picked only have a very slight emotional impact on the reader, on the viewers. Their eyeballs may prick with tears, but then they move on. You know, they've got pre-lunch beers to get to. So you get this sense of the indifference of the British public who are consuming these photographs. They're not moved by them particularly. The idea is as well that they only appear in Sunday supplements, so they're not even the main news. They're secondary. They're borderline of insignificance, but maybe because it's so far removed from the world of rural England that people find it difficult to empathise really. So like I said, it ends on this note of this image of isolation, but also on a note of resignation. They don't care. He knows it. So the declarative nature of the sentence, and they do not care, suggests that this is an unchanging situation. They're going to continue to be uncaring. So his job essentially is a futile one. So quite a bleak ending in lots of ways. One final structure form point I'd sort of draw your attention to, or a couple actually. You'll notice that at the end of each stanza, there's a really powerful rhyming couplet that lends the poem and invests those lines with a real emotive quality. They're probably the most sort of powerfully, emotionally affecting parts of the poem. I think the couplet does that. Also, you'll notice in stanzas 3 and 4, there's some juxtapositioning going on. There's some contrast between the world in stanza 3 of the conflict and the world in stanza 4 of the readers who are consuming the photographs. So you've got this idea of the world of suffering and the world of luxury being contrasted and juxtaposed to demonstrate the stark differences between them. Okay, right, I'll leave it there.